Hello, my name is Christi Scarrow. Welcome to Messy Leadership, where we talk about the hard stuff in managing people. I'm really excited to welcome Pina Melchionna, President and CEO at CITT, Canada's Logistics Association. Thank you for being here, Pina.
Thank you, Christy.
And we've had the chance to work together for a while, but I'm really happy, excited to delve into a little bit more about, the things that you've done through your career. So I want to start by getting a sense for what are the lessons or the more important lessons or that you've learned early in your career that shape you as a leader today?
And so I think probably the earliest lesson, and I was actually quite fortunate to learn it the hard way early in my career, because I think it really did shape my leadership, which was to show up authentically. And it happened for me. So I pivoted a number of times in my career, and I happened to be in banking and finance at the time and had just been promoted into a national role and walked into a boardroom that was all male. And I think as a female leader in particular, we suffer from something called, imposter syndrome. Like, I shouldn't be in this room. There are so many smart people in this room. They're going to figure out I'm a fraud here. And I was new to banking and finance because I was a lawyer by background. And so felt very awkward and uncomfortable in that meeting because they were speaking acronyms. And so I just felt there's no way I know this. I don't understand this. And I had takeaways from that meeting. And so as I sat there and I struggled and I was really afraid of looking stupid by speaking up, and I had to overcome that. And I basically had to say, I'm really sorry if this is a stupid question, but I'm new and I don't understand the acronyms. Could you please explain those acronyms to me? And of course they did that, and I left the meeting. But what was interesting is afterwards, two gentlemen came up to me and said, thank you for asking that, because this isn't our division either. And we didn't know what the acronyms were either. And so that lesson, and I did that out of survival because I had a takeaway from that meeting. And so if I didn't understand what my takeaway was, I was going to look even more foolish later on. And so I think what that taught me is there are probably other people in the room who don't understand and would appreciate the clarification. And I think as leaders, we often forget that we might be speaking at a level that doesn't resonate with everyone in the room. And so the fact that two gentlemen came up to me afterwards and thanked me taught me early on, okay, I can do this. I can show up. And if I'm not comfortable with the material and if I need clarification, it's okay to ask that. And in fact, people appreciate that. So for me, that was the biggest lesson that I leave with everyone. Show up, ask the questions. Other people are afraid to ask the question. And when you do that, and that's a pretty vulnerable place to be in, to open up in a room and say, I don't understand what's happening here. And so show up with that kind of vulnerable, authentic leadership. And it does pay off when you ask the questions.
Yeah, that's a great insight. I've been in that world where you're the only woman in the room, or somebody who's a minority in the room, for those who are in that space, and it's difficult because you feel like maybe it's just me, and so it's great that you had the support from the individuals later to give you that reaffirmation that it was a great question. I'm curious now, saying that you lead with that a lot. How do you have leaders recognize and engage others who may not be in that space? So it's a great encouragement to say, I think, be brave, don't be afraid to ask the stupid question. But if you're actually the one maybe spewing off the information, is there something we can do as leaders to make sure that we are inclusive and we're, inspiring that bravery in others? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so, I think we have to constantly remind ourselves that language can be exclusionary, and especially when we get into the shop talk. And so we're all guilty of that, right? Every industry has their language. Every industry has their little cliques and followings. And I think we have to recognize how exclusionary we can be as leaders. And so sometimes even reaching out to leaders and saying, would you mind, defining what that means for those in the room who might not know, and doing so in a tactful way, because, I'm a lawyer by background. So we have our whole own legal language called legalese that can be pretty exclusionary. So you have to constantly check yourself. And I actually appreciate it when people pause and stop me and say, I didn't know what you were referring to there. And so it is a constant reminder to ourselves that language can be just as exclusionary as other practices. And so to be mindful of the language that we use. And so that's a coaching tip that I try to remind myself of, but also try to remind senior leaders in our association about that. When you are doing a webinar or you're putting on a talk or you're putting on a presentation, be cognizant of not using shop talk, because not everybody may understand that, and be cognizant of the language you use. It actually has happened to me in another scenario where a speaker was referring to our audience as you guys get that, you guys get that, you guys get that. And I think we forget that, you can say you all rather than you guys, because even just that everyday slang that we use can be exclusionary to those who don't identify as guys in the room, right? So, and I actually did, after their talk, pull them aside and say, that was really great. Loved the messaging. If I can just give you a tip for feedback. And I always ask if they're open to the feedback. So my first question is, are you open to some feedback or suggestions for improvement? And once they say yes, I say, I would just be cognizant of your language and perhaps not use the vernacular you guys all the time. I have my own lessons to learn. I use all the time as a filler word. So, be cognizant of those filler words that you use.
And it's great because you're said open to someone being able to say to you, hey, can you explain that, or can you go into depth? And if someone is open to that feedback, obviously that helps. And you probably, I know you operate in a bit more of a male dominated, so it's easy for people to default to that you guys, and it may not be very meaningful. And most people are like, well, guys includes everybody, but really it may not. It may not really feel that way fully, whether it's intended or not. But if I can just reflect on one other thing that I think is important to highlight from what you said, it's that idea of ownership across the board to be able to challenge somebody. So it's the leader themselves being aware of the language. It's the individual who doesn't understand to be able to be responsible for saying, help me understand. And it may even be somebody else in the room who can see, for the body language, or who might have enough thought to process to say, hey, maybe the new person doesn't understand this, or maybe we don't all understand it. So I love how you highlighted that, because it felt like it's ownership all around. No matter what role you're in, you can sort of challenge what people are saying to make sure it's understood by everyone. It's really great.
And if I can follow up on that, I think it's important for leaders to do that to other leaders, because, the newcomers to the table, the people who don't feel completely empowered and don't have the agency to speak up, they're not going to correct a senior leader in the room. So it has to be leaders to other leaders saying, be mindful of this or be mindful of the other. So I do think we have to take accountability for that, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. So as you're now, a more senior leader in your career, what are the things that you still find challenging, that are maybe still messy, and how do you overcome those?
Messy things. Well, there's probably a lot. The people management, the coaching is tough when you've got an underperformer, and I still struggle with that. So how do you maintain your role as a coach, recognize that people want to do well in their job, and they might be struggling, and so wear that hat as a coach to help them get there, versus this is a continuous performance issue and now it's time to be a little bit more direct and to have those hard conversations with people about turning around performance. So I still find that pretty messy, because despite the intention that you come with, which is to get this person to the next level, it's not always received as that. People are not open to constructive feedback as much as they say that they are, and take the constructive feedback as an insult or not as a way to turn around behavior. So I think I still struggle with that on some days.
So one of the ways, because I agree, and I see feedback being so difficult, and if the people you work with them every day, if there's challenges, I like that you're saying you're taking that coach mindset always as almost a starting point. Like I'm trying to help them get better versus, more of a, I'm coming at you and a punishment. But what would you like? What are some of the ways that you've been able to give feedback in a way that has come across in a better way? If it's a challenge for you, but what are the maybe the tips that have helped you make it a little more comfortable? It'll never be comfortable, but maybe a little more.
Yeah, and I think they're pretty rudimentary tips. So always start with a positive message about what they're doing well. And then the messaging around here are some areas that, I notice are holding you back from getting to the next level. And so when you coach it in that kind of conversation, the person is saying, oh, they want me to get to the next level and this is what's required versus here's the negative feedback. Here's something that you're doing poorly and that you need to turn around. And I think even the whole language around performance reviews or, performance improvement plans has been changing in the HR world. I think we want to start referring to them as turnaround plans versus performance improvement plans. And so being able to reinforce really great behavior that they're demonstrating and bringing to the table and coaching the constructive criticism in a way that is meant to get them to the next level versus here's what you're doing poorly.
Yeah, because if you're declaring that, I mean, you're coming with positive intent, but it really is about your goals and where we're trying to take you and what your career progression could look like. And I think that helps probably to set the scene for this feedback is intended for good. Because we can say, I'm here to give you good feedback, but to be specific in that language, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And listen, if you've got tips for me, I'm happy to take them because again, as I say, that is an area of struggle. People get their backs up when you're perhaps giving them that kind of advice and don't always take it as coaching advice. Take it as negative criticism. So I'm happy as well to continue to build my repertoire of skills. And if you've got suggestions, happy to hear them.
Well, the only one little tip I'll say in feedback that I try to impart is that idea of more is more, like some say less is more, but always giving positive reinforcement and feedback all the time so that when that performance driven and that corrective feedback comes out, they're used to hearing all the good things. So I try to say do less of the sandwich model of a whole bunch of feedback and do more a little bit here and there, right? But mostly positive. So everyone sort of thinks feedback already feels like a bad word, right? But if you start saying, well, feedback's actually telling you what you did good, like 80% of the time, as you said, if you're focusing on what they do good, which I think you're already doing, that's to me the key is remembering to reinforce positive behaviors, because I think that's probably an area I've struggled with too, right? Like, well, when it gets to a point, that's when I got to talk to them, but I really haven't been reinforcing all the amazing things. So now they're just gonna not look at me too happily.
Yeah. Great.
So
I take that away as well.
love it. So I guess just again, the audience of folks I'm speaking to are leaders, and all of us struggle with different things as being leaders because it isn't easy. What advice would you have for those maybe who are struggling to manage people?
I think I will just reinforce what I said, which is to recognize that most people are there and truly want to do a good job. We've got different personalities at work, different people who respond to different ways of coaching. And so situational coaching is really important as well. Meet the employee where they're at, use a style that will resonate with them. And I think as leaders, we really have to look at our own and we want to come to the table with this is my approach. But I would encourage leaders to tailor their own approach to meet the employee where they're at, because I think that probably might go a lot farther than saying, you must meet me where I'm at. And so going back to sort of servant leadership principles,
Mm-hmm.
we are here as coaches and we are here to get the best out of our teams. And that most people, by and large, genuinely want to do a good job. People don't show up and say, well, today I'm going to sabotage my co-worker, or today I'm going to sabotage this plan or the other plan. They truly want to get there. And if they're not getting there, there's something in the way. And so change management is so critical, and remembering those principles around change management is so, in particular, for sure.
I know change management was something I don't think I thought enough about, and bringing people along when I was a newer manager, and even now in the work I do, recognizing that I can come in and tell you my opinion, but if you're not sort of buying into it and I'm not coming, as you said, meeting you where you're at, it's not going to have the desired impact. And I would say that's something I definitely struggle with. And I think it's important If I can ask one more building question, because I certainly know a lot about situational leadership and coaching. I like how you talk about situational coaching and altering your style somewhat for that. Can you maybe just talk a little bit more about how you might coach someone differently? Because I think that's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, so some people are quite open to hearing the feedback immediately. You're doing great. I just noticed this one thing. I just need you to be cognizant of that. Conversation done. There are others where if you come at them with that kind of open transparency, are taken aback by that. So it's more about the questions. I just want to reflect on that, last conversation we had, or that last project that you worked on. What did you find that went particularly well? And so asking them to reflect. And where do you see any opportunities that, could have been done differently or handled differently? So rather than giving them the feedback, asking them the question to reflect on it. And 9 times out of 10, they recognize exactly what you recognized and are able to regurgitate it. So, then it doesn't look like it's feedback you're giving them, but feedback they've come to on their own account.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the difference, that sometimes people need to come to that conclusion on their own versus you giving them that feedback. And so that's, I also think about cultural sensitivity as well. So not all employees resonate differently. I have some employees who come from cultures where the boss is the boss, very hierarchical. And so be cognizant that, negative feedback could be absolutely crushing to them. So being cognizant of how people come to the table and what influences them. And we've all got bias, and we've all got backgrounds, and we've all got cultural sensitivity and gender differences. And so recognizing that the way that you speak to people is impacted by so many things going on in the background. And just be cognizant of that, I think, for me, would be the two pieces that I would leave you with.
Yeah, I love it, because what I heard from that was almost this level of how soft and delicate do you need to be versus direct. And it's going to totally depend on their style preference. And you said, and the language you can use, you tailor it a little bit, recognizing how they might interpret it. And that idea of, even the idea of coaching kind of is influencing, because it's recognizing, how do I get my message across? How do I help them change this behavior that I need them to change? So I love that. So thank you so much, Pina. I think it's gone by so fast. Obviously, you've shared some really amazing insights that people managers can use. And to my listeners, if you're looking for a way to navigate the messy bits of leadership, you can find some helpful resources and links in the show notes, or find me at christiscarrow.com. So thank you, Pina.
Thank you very much. Appreciated this conversation.